Welcome to week 7. Last week we talked about part 1 for project 2, and so this week I want to spend a little bit of time talking about part 2 for project 2. So the main piece of part 2 is that you are going to provide a report of a colleague's feedback on the collaborative strategies that you've used in your lesson plan. So you can, in the section that is titled directions, you can read through the information that's provided for part 2. It's very detailed as to what you're going to provide. There are a few bullet points that talk about 250 to 500 words. You're going to clearly document in your report why you created this particular lesson and what the intended outcomes were, how and why you structured the lesson to meet those outcomes, and why you accommodated different student learning styles. You'll want to put that together before you actually go through the process of sharing your lesson plan with your colleagues, because some of the questions you'll probably want to ask will be around those purposes and getting feedback as to if they necessarily agree with what you said. Now, you wouldn't want to come out and say, well, this is how I feel ahead of time. You probably want to capture through questions, their thoughts of, do you feel that this lesson captures or meets the outcomes, why or why not? And then you can go back and look at that feedback that you got and compare it to your own thoughts to see. You're also going to describe what the interviewee found effective about the lesson plan for collaboration and its execution. So there's some questions as examples. What are the strongest parts of the plan? What was the collaboration? You want to look at those questions and come up with good questions to ask when you're conducting this interview. And then the third bullet is you want to describe areas the interviewee identified as needing refinement and the advice they gave you for improving those areas. And again, these 3 sections should all be between 250 and 500 words. Finally, last bullet is you want to incorporate at least one suggestion for your colleague, one suggestion your colleague provided in your lesson plan, and describe how you incorporated the suggestion. So once you find out what changes are recommended, you're going to choose one of those and figure out how you're going to implement it. And in that 4th bullet point, you're going to write about the plan that you came up with for addressing that in 250 to 500 words. So you'll, as always, when it comes to the project, you'll want to go back through and look at the different resources that are available in terms of project 2 and unit 2. And so if you go back to unit 2, you'll see that there is information on the role of the teachers, soliciting feedback. That's probably where you'll want to go, is 2.2 and the unit resources that are available for that. You can go through and look at principal connection, reaching out for feedback. And when you open these resources, you'll find that there's some really good information in the different resources that are available. So this one talks about reach out and ask, having teachers identify what you should start, stop, and continue doing as an effective way to solicit their thoughts. It talks about what research is said on that topic, and continues. It says find a coach, a good mentor. There's not really any examples of questions you should ask in this article, but it is good information to read in terms of reaching out for feedback. But if I skip down to the very bottom of the page, there's a resource titled How to Get the Feedback You Need. And if you look at the questions to consider when you read this part or this paper, this resource, the second one says, why might it be hard for online educators to solicit feedback, and what can you do to make it easier to receive consistent input from colleagues? Also, what specific questions can you ask about your lesson plans or teaching practices to get helpful feedback? So that's a good reading to go through before you put together your interview questions for your colleague when you're going through your lesson plan. So as always, please go through. There's a video that gives you some good information. Go through all of those resources first before you start putting together the interview. you actually want to have your interview questions written out ahead of time. And what also might be good is if you actually share your lesson plan along with the questions um, with your colleague first and give them a certain amount of time to kind of review those materials and the questions before you then sit down and actually go through the questions and ask those uh, and put together the feedback. So that's just some advice on how to tackle part 2 of project 2.